My name is Scott Losee. I work as an independent sustainability consultant. I run a company called Losee Consulting. A lot of my work is involved in infrastructure sustainability and verification, and that's been my activity for quite a long years now. I've been verifying for ISCA since it began, really. So I was part of the first verification panel for the Whitsunday sewage treatment plant, and I've been going since then. So a couple of years now I've been doing that. Yeah, I'm very lucky at the moment to be able to work directly as an assessor as well for an infrastructure sustainability project, which is the Logan Enhancement Project. In that project, Transurban is the client, I suppose. They're the manager of the asset on behalf of Transport and Main Roads, and CPB Contractors is the contractor involved for the DNC contract, and I'm working for them, advising them on sustainability, and we'll actually manage sustainability on that job through the process. Apart from that, I'm working on an energy and water efficiency strategy for the Moreton Bay Regional Council. I have a couple verifications that I'm currently working on, and always have a couple of those going on. And I'm helping Transurban with a number of various environmental and sustainability initiatives, such as tunnel energy efficiency, things that come up like that. Sure. With the verification process, it's probably quite challenging for people to put forward their best activities on sustainability and have them be independently judged. So the verifiers themselves are judging the work that's been done, but they do it in a very precise way according to the detail that's in the technical manual. So the technical manual is very much the Bible and is part of the processes that help guide the independence of the process. So there is a black and white written word which is used as the reference point for the verifiers throughout. So that's one way that the independence is assured to an extent. The process involves the submission at two stages. There's a first round submission and the second round submission. The verifiers will know, the assessors who are putting together the work on behalf of the projects and the assets have been doing that for quite a long time. So they will work on that for, a year or something like that, and place a lot of effort in preparing the best possible design submission they might put forward, or the as-built submission or operations submission. So I can imagine that that's a little bit trepidatious for people having to face up to that independent verifiers having a look at that work. One of the tricks to it, I suppose, is that the verifiers themselves have a limited amount of time to review the information, and we can come back to talk about some more of those aspects of it. In the process of establishing the project and its registration, the projects and the assets have an opportunity to comment on the suitability of the verifiers that have been proposed for the project. In that respect, they can determine for their own selves if they perceive any potential conflicts of interest. Similarly, all of the verifiers are asked to disclose any potential conflicts of interest, and ensuring that they have some level of knowledge about that asset type that's involved. So it's not secret who the verifiers are. They're not sort of blind verifiers in that respect, but the process is quite controlled to maintain that independence. One of the best things is that for the design and as-built ratings, you have two verifiers assigned to the project. As a result of that, those verifiers operate independently to start with, so they'll review all of the material that's been put forward in the assessment. And then they have an opportunity through the verification meeting to compare notes together with the case manager. So the case manager is fundamental as well, because that person is seeing a range of verifications, has a knowledge of how the rules are applied in different circumstances, in addition to the verifiers' knowledge they've developed themselves. So in coming together in the verification meeting, each verifier will have their own perspective, and it's a conversation that sort of draws out, for example, did you happen to see this piece of information? It doesn't seem like you had taken account of that in your verification thinking. So hopefully it allows us to work through to make sure we're not wasting the assessor's time in terms of making sure we've covered all the material that's been presented, but also two different perspectives on that information that's been presented, so that we can provide the best advice back to the assessors. So in that process, the two-step process assists in some respects as well to the objectivity and independence, where we're providing our initial thoughts on the assessment that's been made back to the project teams. And then they're able to say, well, for example, I don't understand why the verifiers didn't see this piece of information, or I can see that they're not understanding it the way I attempted to present it, and therefore they've got a second opportunity to reconfigure the information they're presenting through the assessment. Well, the verification end is the checking part of the submission that's being made. So it starts with, once you've kicked off your project as an assessor, you then need to anticipate a couple of the next steps. So one is the Weightings Assessment process, and one is the base case process. So those are both critical and both things that are verified. I guess we could start with the Weightings Assessment. So that's done collaboratively, in a sense, with the key stakeholders on the project, with a fair bit of advice from the case manager from ISCA as well. So in that process, the determination of the relative significance of the different elements on the project, following a fairly simple questionnaire process, provides a statement of where that project sees its individual significance of the different issues that are involved on the project. And that leads to weighting of the credits. So that provides a project-specific weighting. However, it then goes to verification for a couple of reasons. One is that there's the possibility of overriding the automatic settings in that to take into account different sorts of factors that aren't allowed for in the simple questionnaire. And those things require a more independent judgment made by the verifiers about whether that's an accurate interpretation or not. And sometimes the questionnaire might produce results that may not be sensible for the circumstances. Or there may also be a situation where the assessors and the collective group doing that Weightings Assessment have interpreted an intention of ISCA, the IS rating scheme, in a way that's possibly not appropriate, or maybe not appreciated the significance, for example, of the proximity of a piece of infrastructure to sensitive receivers and how that relates to the relative weight that's placed on a credit. It also, the verification process ends, so we receive the Weightings Assessment and any related evidence that might be uploaded to look at in relation to the determinations that have been made on the Weightings Assessment. And we'll go through that and just make sure, first of all, that it makes sense to us, and look for any sort of potential risks that might not be adequately reflected in those weightings. And that process allows some further interaction with the project or the asset to determine, whether we understand what they're talking about and we come to a mutual agreement on the Weightings Assessment. The base case process is one that is sometimes misunderstood by projects, and it's worth investing some time understanding what you're meant to do in that. So essentially you have to establish what is going to be the reference point for determining reductions in energy, water, and materials on the job. So partly that'll be being able to say that this, for example, fully developed concept design is a base case, or a tender design is a base case, but they'll have to probably be interpreted in various ways because things change. So that has to be settled amongst the project stakeholders. Then we look at critically the business as usual technologies and processes that are associated with that base case. So it's commonly misunderstood that the base case is really like a physical footprint of a project on the land, when in fact it has more to do with understanding how you might have normally done that project and what the difference is in terms of what benefits you might be able to bring through introducing further sustainability. So the reason that that is verified up front is that you need to be able to consider, I guess, provide a check against the possibility of inflating a base case in order to make a reduction in energy, water, and materials that's not real, not tangible. So it's about understanding that that is going to be a legitimate saving. And that assists ISCA and the broader industry in being able to say, well, we know on these projects through this rigorous process, these sorts of reductions have been achieved. Then we would move on to the assessment process, which is the verifiers are basically absent for a long period of time, and then they jump back in. So it's usually only one verifier that deals with the base case and the Weightings Assessment. When we look at the first round submission, so the case manager has been working with the project or asset to a certain point, then the submission is made and it's provided to verifiers. Verifiers will have a couple weeks to turn around the verification. They're looking at all of the documents that have been uploaded in the various categories on SharePoint, and the credit summary forms and comparing the claims that have been made to the ability to provide evidence against that. Then looking at the detail of the technical manual to see whether all of the, first of all, the criteria have been satisfied for the levels that have been claimed, and then checking to make sure that all of the must statements within the technical manual are also satisfied adequately. And then we provide our advice back at that stage. There is an opportunity for a face-to-face, what we call a face-to-face verifier meeting, which is a voluntary activity on the part of projects and assets. Usually quite recommended. You get a chance to meet at least one of your verifiers in person, and an ability to try to, I guess it's a more enhanced form of communication with your verifiers, where you're able to, in a one-on-one conversation, make sure that we have a common understanding of what's being claimed and what's being provided as evidence, and a proper understanding of how the project circumstances are and how they're being interpreted. Following that, there's a second round, which is a final submission for verification. Hopefully all of the advice that's been provided back from the verifiers is accommodated, and the projects have a realistic understanding of what they can continue to claim through the second round. That submission is made and gone through the same process, a repeat of the first round, and then final determination of the awarded score and recommended level is provided to ISCA from that point. There's many detailed technical tips that you might want to have a look at, but I think the most important thing in terms of tips is to have a broader perspective and take a wider understanding of what, as an assessor, you need to do to be able to be successful in the submission that you put forward. So first of all, it means understanding the significance of your role as an assessor and a sustainability leader on a project or asset. So being able to be a leader within that group, anticipate what needs to be done, and being able to interact with the people that will have to undertake activities, design activities, amending designs, preparing documents, and making sure that records are kept, the variety of tasks, making sure that those things are, you're able to get those things locked in. With the assessor's responsibility, it's very important to be considerate of the timescales that are involved. So there's a range of activities. We spoke before about the base case and the weightings assessment. There's an ISCA kickoff workshop. There are your internal processes. There's effectively a critical path for a number of the credits that it's very important for the assessors to appreciate what those points are and make sure that those things don't pass you by in the process. So one example is in the community health indicators for HEA1. If you don't understand what's required of that credit and get it going at an early place, you won't be able to establish the baseline reference points to refer back to and what influence you've been able to make in the community health initiatives that you might implement on the project. So those types of things, if the base case is delayed too far, sometimes it's left very close to the design process, then that, to the design rating submission. When it's left too long for the base case assessment, you possibly don't understand what achievements or reductions can be made. You don't have a good understanding of what points you're likely to achieve, and a lot of the decisions that may have to be influenced have already sort of sailed past, so that's an issue. When it comes time to prepare the submission of evidence, it's important to imagine that your verifiers are sort of blindly looking at all this information you're throwing at them and not perhaps understanding the project in detail, and using your written communication to effectively express those things that you're putting forward. And that doesn't mean having pages and pages of description. It means getting to the critical points that you have to satisfy in the technical manual and addressing them concisely and directing the verifiers to evidence that they can find readily to support your claims that are made in the submission. So again, it's not about having a long-winded response to things. It's about having a clear one that is directly related to the requirements in the technical manual, and making sure that you understand what those requirements are through working closely with your case manager. I can imagine it's pretty tricky to receive, someone passing judgment the first time around the effort that's put in. And I would first say that verifiers do have an understanding of the level of effort that's made in preparing a submission and the importance of that to organizations and to contractors. When you receive feedback from verifiers, certainly in the first round, you should understand that it's sometimes asking questions. That doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't been able to demonstrate something fully, but there is the one-off opportunity, just as you have at the second round for your submission, there's a one-off opportunity to get it right. The first round is the verifier's one-off opportunity to get it right in terms of the feedback that they provide. So the second time they give you feedback, that's the final say on that matter. So if there's any sort of gray areas, then the verifiers will likely raise those with you. And bear in mind, too, that there are two verifiers on these projects, and they have different perspectives and opinions. So in a sense, it'll be, if there's doubt between those verifiers, they're likely to put a question back to the project. So you're going to end up with fewer apparently verified credits than you might expect. You know, you might have believed that you've done your very best job and outlined everything to a great deal of detail, but the verifiers are likely to err on the side of caution in terms of the advice that they give you back. So the first thing is really not to panic about it, to make sure you read through the comments that have been provided by the verifier and have a strong understanding of what they're trying to say, and the case manager should be able to help you with that. Put in place a plan, liaise with your case manager to make sure that you can come back with the information that has been provided by verifiers. If you are requested by verifiers, if you think that you're really unsure, then it's best to sign up for a face-to-face verification meeting. Get those in priority order, those matters that you really need to resolve with the verifiers. Talk it through with them so that you understand what has to be demonstrated in order to get those credits. If it looks like, you know, things have been asked in relation to the matters that you've been put forward for your evidence that you're not likely to be able to provide evidence for, or it appears that a verifier might have identified a weak point that you didn't anticipate. If you're not really able to satisfy those requirements, then by all means reduce your claim for those credits if you can, and not attempt to sort of make something out of nothing if that's what your inclination is. There have been a couple, and I think what's happened is that the industry is learning a little bit about this process through these types of activities, I suppose, and the quality of the submissions that we're receiving are improving progressively from project to project and year to year. So the recent ones that have stuck out as being fairly good to verify, the Torrens to Torrens project in Adelaide, were pretty good at making clear statements of their evidence. They also didn't attempt to claim things that were probably that they might have had a thin claim to. That verifiers appreciate that in the sense that if they're looking at information, they're not looking at a desperate attempt to try to make something stack up, but they're looking at a clear response to the requirements that they can tick off on effectively. If the project is just attempting to get every possible point, however likely or unlikely, then that can frustrate the verifiers. So Torrens to Torrens, I think they did a really good job at their submission overall. Likewise, the Level Crossings project package 2, that's been verified. In fact, went through it this morning in their first round. They were a very good submission. It was quite clear what they were looking for. There are a couple areas, of course, that we'll be discussing with the project, but there were no ambit claims for credits. There were succinct credit summary forms that pointed us to specific excerpts from the evidence and really made it an easier process for us to give the right answers to.